Okay, so the theme that we're working on, the concept that we're in, is that of what I would consider like isolationism, separatism, I don't know, whatever, those themes. I have a few documents that I have written up to instill this, or whatever, and I shall read them and then we'll kind of go into it as we always do, same thing as always. The whole awkward in the beginning thing. Just like that. But anyway, the last time I was aware of what was before me, I could only recall some event in my life that was farther away than anything I could remember. In that thought alone, I could see the confusion on the face that looks into me. You see, I have always been alone, not only lacking in the presence of another, but also when I peer into the soul of someone who has claimed to be the person that I was always looking for. It is a sad fate, but in my life alone, I have always been alone, with the thoughts that in this moment I am lost. For you see, instead of searching to find who I am in this great grand world, I instead try to find purpose into what I could be for another. This then leads me to look for every fault in my being as to shape it correctly, in the hopes that another will look at my selflessness deeds with vigor and trust me into which I seek to test the person that I place trust in me to the limit of their breaking. This I cannot help. I have always done this, and now where I sit in my life is a place so hollow and void, as if the person that I was still might be lingers, if only in fragments, like a house with the spirit of the old ones lingering until they find the salvation in the next realm. What soul that I have lost always looks for me from afar, and ponders to what my next loss will be. What will I give up next in order to feel completed by another? Why do I do this? Questions that I never wanted to answer, and the fears that perhaps I will not understand what stands before me. What wickedness hides away in the recesses of my broken mind? It was as if I had betrayed my innocence, betrayed my heavenly body. Now cursed, I am to be stuck in this realm of life, to where the darkness grows. I wish to say that I have no fear of this place, but the truth is, I am fear in this place. I am what oh shit. I am what darkness seeks out, the light, in order to smother, or rather, the unity consciousness become depressed and lost. Then we will find the death throes of tyranny and oppression. Wow. You know what's hilarious? I read the wrong part. Fuck! I am what darkness seeks out the great light in order to smother the flame of life that in reality is within myself. God, that makes much more sense. The pain that I seek is that of destruction only seen outside of where I truly inhabit. For the world around me is in the state of doom by the guise of my own doing. For I truly affect the world greater than any mortal is willing to admit. We away. Shit, there's no L there. We always believe that the world is being corrupted by hidden men far away, or even groups of evil individuals. But the truth is that it is we individuals that cause it to be so. You, me, we are the problem. Not what makes us feel so wrong, but how we make it so. There is so much hope that can be found in this realization, but sadly that will never be so. The pain of the world is cast by one to another. The person that holds the pain clings onto this fact to give them hope that, quote, your evil will be crushed so the world can be free again. Yet they are me, and I do the same, to cast the blame, to relieve my pain. In reality, that casting will lead the world to fall to its knees. There is no right and wrong, good and bad. Why those stark concepts have arisen are from the culture of our time, where we seek our, where we seek out pleasure in order to find the whole in our lives. But instead that whole is filled with the aspirations of another. portals we are to the wickedness of greed. Now we stand against each other in hopes that winning out against what we believe to be wrong will save the crumbling world, and peace we will find. This cannot ever be so. As it was said, the pain we feel... I saw something and I had to go look at it, motherfucker. The pain we feel is that which we allow to irk ourselves. You cannot stop from another until you stop that from within yourself. For those that believe, quote, I am not the problem, but the solution, end quote, then already are you doomed to repeat the mistakes that have been laid before you by countless individuals lost to time. You cannot simply repeat that which causes harm, for down that oath is only ruin and sorrow, when our own world, opportunity, or rather, unity consciousness, has become depressed and lost. Then we will find the death throes of tyranny and oppression. It merely was turned from one side and given to the other. If we are going to continue this black and white, good and bad, right and wrong, left versus right, then we can see that which is within our own body. Like we must begin to see this. Left side of brain versus right, our anger versus our love, our frustration versus our lament, our happiness or our sadness. You see, we all have pain within us that has led to a line of thought that cannot be questioned by another. And there, in that, they nitpick to find an alternate mission statement to further a person's anger. What problem in this world we do unto ourselves, and there is only we to blame. It doesn't matter how righteous you think you are, fighting the tyranny of oppression. You are still that wicked thing before you. When you lose it in your might to fight against that which you already lost, that which gave you conviction, there is no right side of history, just a winner to the consciousness of the time. It could be right, or it could be wrong. But that moment needed to happen, and needed to be so, its outcome, in order for another moment to be presented. For darkness of evil was born from the greatest of pain, but not only the other way around. Quote, why do you think you can see injustice before you? Because you feel it within yourself. You are the thing that needs to be destroyed in order to have a world free of pain. That's the first one. I'm going to staple that. I don't like paper clips. Hey, what is this? Go away. So yeah, that's the first one that we got. And this is the deeper theme of the book. This whole isolationist, neutralist isolationism, I think is what it's called. Neutralist isolationism. Self-coined term. Okay, here's the second one. What love that we need when the very same flame hides away under the vast vestige of our hope. Why is it that we cling to something so ethereal? What is it about the passion that makes us chase it so into the darkness to never be found again? Yet in the era of this writing, it seems that the flame of love has been stamped out, and put in its place is the rage of insecurity. This has always been, or does the dream state of life make it so? I meant, how has this always been? What has hindered this growth? And why do we find ourselves acting out our pains to another? Again, it has always been this way. But now we have become more aware of it. Sure, the case of the words reaching one another quicker has grown, but still those words are only but confused. For when we express emotion, that in momentary thought, through text, then we begin to see the folly of this modern generation. Words that cast emotion should only be stated when fleeting glimpses has all but vanished. For the written word was only meant to capture and store that which makes mankind, not instantly grasp, decipher, and dictate meaning behind the person's pain, and pass judgment to further generations to cling to, and in turn they have grown to offense and have to hide their true selves, to which, like we see, they vent out their expression through another, like a scapegoat. The problem that we have is pure emotion should never be expressed without a face to convey it. Life has grown at an exponential rate, And now we find ourselves just trying to find meaning. When meaning is so easily given by those who wish to be seen as altruistic and wise, when in reality, there is no truth that has been by another in order to regurgitate back in cookie cutter fashion to the masses, in which they seek it as if it was the replacement for religion. Many things have become contrived and twisted, but that is merely just a growing pain of a generation that were only shown how to rebel for the sake of mankind's dominance. Until now, we see the authoritarian seeking shelter from the new dictators of freedom. Those few who seek to control what words there are being uttered, because, as it was stated before, they have grown accustomed to what pain there is behind the frustration of another. And when they get that control, they will truly seek a world that does not sully their true self, meaning that they wish to quiet the painful world around them, and not face the fact that it has pain. What we are seeing now is a movement that is embodiment of depression on a scale that has reached unity consciousness. A sad truth it is, but we must understand that this is merely just a lashing out, and it will subside. But just like depression, it will come again, and we will act out, for growth happens there, but only when we are aware that indeed we have lashed out, and jumped onto an event happening in our world that gives us credence to behave in a manner to vent our frustrations, and cause panic to those we believe are to blame, when in reality, they are no different than what looks back at you in the mirror. Und the last one. The last one is very short. Just like your temper right now. I don't know what it's about. I don't forget this one. The count of the ideas that swim in my mind are at times astounding. And I cannot believe that in the moment of their conception I was in the lowest time of my life. I wonder further that if a place of life can be equated to the concept of misery, and why the author looks for this throughout his life, searching in the grandest parts to find the smallest trouble in order to define that pain in which growths can appear. It is, however, in these moments that we can see the closest idea to, quote, divine intervention. And thusly we can attain the thought idea of a lesson being taught to us by a creator that looks to give in our hardest toils. This was an idea so taught amongst in secret by the culture of our era. One cannot imagine that will produce any ill work, for that very work was to be somewhat self-ordained by the fixation of pain and even suffering. What can truly hide in the mind of one who seeks this so? Are they looking for something lost, or are they rather searching and mining until the depleted idea of divine intervention? This thought eludes me more and more as I grow older. What can be attained by the pleasure of misery through a mind that already has an avenue of hardship? That I cannot say, for in this very moment I only contemplate what intrigue comes to me. In these moments of revelry, tracing the apparition only can I lead me astray into the darkness that can be in the mind when the sources run dry. For those moments are but influenced by the nature up to that point. What I was teaching myself in the world around me, those self-taught behaviors that guided me to form perception unto the hardship of my path that lay behind me, skewn and later shaped my memory to serve what purpose it lay ahead of me. This is an eventual folly of my sin, to once again seek out the question to the pain that led me to this moment. Time works that way in purpose, at least in our minds, that is, to once again be the fuel of our own sight. And what we remember that also serves this venture, to hold the facts of our choices so that it can help further this idea that we are here for a purpose of our own doing. It is where you hear the words, I wouldn't change anything, or even, it was a life lesson. when in fact these ideas are merely covert expressions in order to make the person feel that they're always in control. And what harm they brought to themselves was a mistake. It will never happen again. Now, this mode of thinking can be dangerous because at times it can neglect or negate the concept that the person will ever truly see why they allowed such circumstances to have arisen. It's foolish to suggest that what lessons of life was not about the consciousness that has been progressed further. It takes the true healing process of the mind away, and forever that person walks forward, not facing what pain they had learned. We simply just don't look back or merely accept the fact that because there's nothing I can do now, when in fact that statement is incorrect. That's the last one. So with that, that's kind of the moving concept of the book. That's the philosophy. That's part of the philosophy happening. Now, I do have new ideas for characters. Characters of Vathia. And, that's wrong. That's Vathia, that's Cyprus, that's Titus. That's not what I want. Yes, there he is. Jacopo. Because these guys are going to help me with this idea. So characters kind of represent things, moments, thoughts, concepts, whatever. Essentially. Because just like in real life, a character can, like a real person can embody a moment of time, embody something that's possible, or a thought, a mode of thinking, or anything like that. So these will be my ideas with Vathia and Alestra, or Alestra, depending on where you come from. So the main concept of the book is what I had previously said. It's basically the idea of this living the path of the middle, an isolationist, someone who is away from these heavy thoughts of left and right, good and bad, and all that stuff. And that's something I don't want to be a part of. So that's kind of what's happening in the book when it comes to Eris' story and what he's trying to explore and what he's doing. And just his viewpoints there. So when you're watching Eris's journey, you're viewing it as someone who is neutral. You're viewing it as someone who doesn't hold opinion from either side. He's merely a spectator, and that's kind of the point of that. That's why some people might get frustrated with it. Christ, kid, do something. But that's the point. It's just looking and seeing what's happening and acting only when necessary. But it doesn't ever feel right. So that's kind of those things I had read before. That's just what Eris is. I mean, just cognizant, aware, not able to allow himself to fall into a category and totally make himself just void of everything now. Now he becomes a character, because that's what you become when you choose a side in an argument, or you choose a side in a movement, or I don't know, anything. You become a character of that. In a play, essentially. And then someone has control over you. And that's because of the consciousness of thought that is within that group. We don't like these group of people because of this said reason. Well, now you find yourself a part of that. And now you need only regurgitate that in your own way to justify it to yourself. When in reality, those people are very naive of how much they are, dictating someone else's life. The very thing they say they fight against. I didn't go really far into that. I can go pretty deep. But I think I'll probably jump into that later. When you get into the second book is when you'll finally see Vathia and Alestra. Now those two I mean, obviously, they're main characters that are also conduits, just like Eris is. Are they dictated by the Forgotten King? And they struggle with the Whisper and all that stuff, but they have something interesting in their story. For what they represent are the two sides. So we see in the modern era right now the two sides of the struggle. And you could pin it any way you want. Just think of what's going on right now and just say, what is one side saying? What is the other? What is the left saying? What is the right saying? That stupid shit. And how they basically put themselves in boxes. It doesn't make sense you can do that, but apparently it happens. That's what Vathia and Elastra are going to explore. And that's where Eris comes in, because he's the middle, so I'll get more clear with all that, but I feel like we should start with Vathia first. I don't know why, but yeah. There are the thoughts of fear that can be attached to someone's opinion. That in turn was formed from a place that has caused said person to choose a side, like that of a line being drawn in the sand. As to why people do this, it is very unclear. Perhaps to find the answer to this question, we have to look into what person we are speaking of. The story of Vathia. So when we talk about the relationship between Vathia and Elastra, it is very easy to say these two are like fire and ice. And the real purpose of these two viewpoints, at least in the novel, are to help in the progress of showing on a social level the difference between right and left. When one follows the creed to do what is right by the ideals of righteousness, the other follows a creed of accountability. Now this accountability is a direct term from Vathia. As to what it means, we should explore the mind of this individual as closely as we can, externally at least. Now at a glance, his behavior is seen as brash and even racially tense. He can be seen as a xenophobe or biased to a religion. But these fears were constructed as a young man that was thrown into combat, to which his experiences of fear were formed by a man he fought against. The hidden enemy that probed, away in a foreign land, the land of his enemy, he was tested in life and lost almost everything that he had built up to that point. So what he does now so what does he hold on to now? Why does he feel the whole world will try to take that which he cares about away from him? He is very hostile to anything that is different from him and his own. That is a fear that has grown over time, and the longer his fear boils within, the greater the hate swells. He then resorts to barbarism in his approach, in effect, to put the fear of God within his opponent. For you see, everything has taught him that the threat that is upon him is an opponent on the field of battle, so he treats it as such. This is why he is sent into a rage that swallows him whole, and there is no way out of the darkness. In this moment is where he invites the darkness, the breeding ground to what comes next. The Whisper. How it affects Vathia. So it is quite clear that the Whisper is always in the conduits. It doesn't have free rein, however. Only when the time is right can it surface. This is a struggle that the three will have for the rest of their lives. That darkness is looming threat over their heads. But back to Vathia. Now his awareness for the darkness is like that of a wave that will crash over and envelop him. But as much as he prepares, he cannot stop it. To which he is swept up. And this is where it begins. Now Vathia's reaction, as it was stated, to threat is conflict. He has learned at the very young age to fight when threatened. So when the darkness swirls over him, he quickly turns to the nearest thing that irks him and unleashes his full might of rage unto it. For when, quote, order is usurped by the throes of tyranny, he will throw all he can at this enemy. Now, as to why he meets head-on the other side of his belief in bloody combat could be in his mind a way to combat folk not holding themselves accountable for their actions. Why is accountability such an import to him? What is accountability? Well, to start simply, it is responsibility. In ethics, it is answerability and blameworthiness, which is culpable. An expectation that is held up. It is the acknowledgement and the assumption for any such thing the individual has direct or indirect control of. So how has this come to be? Well, at a young age, Vathya felt he had to be responsible to those around him. He even goes as far as to sacrifice himself for another, in complete silence. This behavior was further enforced when he entered the service of war for his comrades. Now, we see him doing the same for any whom he has his love. He would die easily for those around him who define his existence. Now does this rage come from this place? When does he feel threatened? Man, I'm going to read that whole sentence over again. He would die easily for those around him who define his existence. Now does his rage come from this place when he feels threatened? Or is it for himself, a kind of defense that which causes him pain? Yeah, I gotta there's a lot of things I gotta move around in this fucking thing. Keep bumping it. This is something that has eluded him for some years. For you see, Vathya is one who is somewhat enigmatic in his approach. You see, he was a man who never let anyone see his pain, yet all you can see is his anger toward it. So in some respects, this could very well be a case of dealing with his internal struggle, acting towards it. So in the same respect, this could very well be the case of dealing with his internal struggle, acting towards it. So in some respect, this could be very well the case of dealing with his internal struggle, acting out in a brash and offensive manner. For this gives him strength against what he perceives as, quote, hostile. Now, in this, he will just about abandon his own image or even character to fight against this internally, until he has exhausted all his energy and fallen flat to the ground. In a reactionary response that is brought about by fear, for when he walks alone into a place that he feels is dangerous, then there he will sacrifice all that he has created and built for himself in order to put the wickedness from it. This also can be seen as enhanced. This also can be seen enhanced when it comes to his kin. In those moments, as it was stated earlier, he will throw everything away that makes him his own identifiable self in regards to that person. Now, a question of why he does this is another hard one to pin down. He is so willing to walk away from what he has built to either fight tyranny or defend whom he cares about at the drop of a hat. Self-sacrifice. It is very clear that Vathya holds no regard to his safety in any given situation, and many times will he sacrifice his own consciousness in order to give strength to another. He will try with all his might to build up that person and do whatever they need to complete some sort of vision that was created. As in, his friends or comrades' actions are greater than what might become of him, even in situations that are deemed dangerous. He would walk to the ends of Yondra if he had to, just for a smile or approval of another. Now this could very well be because of his, at times, overbearing father, where his intent can be a bit overzealous. For his father has in many ways given great burden to Vathya in his life because of this. Because of his father's, shall we say, human nature, breaking a code that was created in the mind of Vathya. This was where it was instilled in him to be held accountable. Because there were times where his father would ask him to help him become a better man. And when Vathya tried, only was he scolded by his father, to whom quickly forgot the promise he had made with a young man and a very impressionable mind. This was just another letdown for someone he truly cared about. And for many long years did he watch the man fall apart, as he did not take care of himself the way he promised his son he would. All of this is attached to fear. And in that fear is the, once again, breeding ground for the darkness. This darkness swells, and all of his insecurity is allowed in. All the things that cause him pain. He attaches his own experience of negativity on what gives him fear. And that very same fear grows to be his enemy on the field of battle. This is a vicious cycle that he lives in. He will always treat it with an intensity because that very same feeling of threat that he attaches a fear, even if the fear has nothing to do with it, and attacks. The cost was burned into his mind of failure. Failure meant that he will either lose a part of himself or, what is more important to him, someone he loves. For he carries deep within the outer shell of rage pure and untampered love, compassion, and complete trust. This is the foundation of his being. And all the negative and defeated feelings are all derived from this. This is how, the eyes of Eris, he is redeemable. He is built around the love he shares for his kin. This means that deep down, he is a young man lost in the harsh experience of war. And not just because of his combat experience, but he has been at war for almost his whole life, having to fight and struggle to keep his head above ground, having to prove who he is and how much he cares for people, bending over backwards in his attempts until he has lost himself to the chase that is love. His problem is there are very few people who love him just for being himself. He feels that people love him for what he does for them. And this is where his foundation is shaken. This is the flaw in his ways. And this is what must be helped in order for him to heal all of those old wounds that have led him astray down the dark path of self-torment. It's an isolated case, and it's just we're talking about Vathia. And the concept of left and right is basically what I'm saying is when people act out in fear against something, and you're like, well, they're just wicked and they're evil and there's something wrong with them, and that's pure evil and all that fucking bullshit that doesn't exist. That's just a cop-out because they're afraid to understand what it is. And that's what it is. On that side is trying to understand what makes someone fearful. What makes them afraid? Why do people act out in such a way? That's the idea and the concept to explore. But I'm not sure. I'm quite sure why people do what they do. But that's the thing we're trying to explore here. But with Vathia's character, he's representing the ones that are the gun-toting. What's the amendment? Second Amendment right guys. The ones that are on the side of the cops. You know, that shit. That's what Vathia represents. And the idea with people like that is you must explore their fear and not just single them out and make them halt, because as it's been realized, it doesn't fucking work that way. That's not what this is about. Trying to make a world better by making it quiet doesn't work. So the opposite side, which is Elastra, is the side of the social justice, the white person's guilt, jumping into any hoop to come across as that good white person, And this side can be just as bad. Now, Elastra is not too different from Vathia, but for some reason, they find themselves on different sides of the battlefield. As to why this is, will be understood within the exploration of Elastra's deep psyche. Now, before we begin, we must understand that he and Vathia have become comrades against the threat of darkness. So the bond they have shared is quickly intense. They both share in this realization that they both are conduits for the bidding of the Forgotten King, and even are the targets for the Whisper. So this is where they have built a companionship on the field of battle. But after this, they share no similar belief. Even if they fight the same enemy, or are being chased by the same foe, they individually see a different pursuer. This leads them to be on opposite sides of the battle ahead. What has driven them apart? Well, from my understanding, that would be Aleistra's view of the deeds of Vathia. For he feels that Vathia has been taken by the darkness, and it has leached into his whole soul, core of his humanity, thus rendering him corrupted and tainted by the evil, and even unredeemable in his eyes. Now this was a grave confusion. But what led to this confusion? This is where we will explore who Aleistra is in order to find this out. Aleistra's fear is derived from his ability to stomp out the very same tyranny that his comrade Vathia fights, though he will endeavor to dive deeper into what makes this a threat. Whereas Vathia fights evil to fight evil, Aleistra will look as to what makes this evil and finds a redemption within it if he can. Now this will cause him to abandon his own self-preservation in order to walk into the belly of the beast, just to, in the hopes of his mind, save a man who was fallen. The problem here is how Aleistra views evil. He believes in righteousness and equality for all, thus giving him hope that he himself will be accepted by this group. For you see, he had a great need to be accepted and loved, but his approval reaches out beyond those whom he loves. He looks to be part of a movement that will hopefully help him justify his intent and show himself what a good person he can be. This is because he feels at times that perhaps he is not doing enough for people who have injustice towards them. And this moment Aleister will take to him in order to make the world a better place, quote. Now this is why it is so important to him. My goodness, I'm sorry. Now why is this so important to him? The state of the world. He fights to take mankind He fights to take mankind out of the era that saw the destruction of the Inakume culture, to quell the disbelief of injustice and vanquish the prophet of evil and his minions. He looks to protect any man who is opposed to a tyrant, those that feel threatened by evil cohorts, or rhetoric and a slander. Quote, if nobody fights them, then they win, end quote. He is in the pursuit to chase darkness with the flame and push it back to where it cannot be. He is on the side of God. It will not be cowed by evil in the world. This is what he claims. But why does he feel the view to world as a battleground for a holy war? In reality, there is no good versus evil until people make it so. Then we see death on a major scale, all in the pursuit of victory. Because as we know, there is no true evil. That is what hides within us all. And there are people like Aleister who choose to take their anger and hatred and turn it on what they can identify as evil, making their justifications to vent this wickedness out on something that was abled so that they can feel guiltless when they kill those who are themselves lost. It is a tragic case of disassociating pain into what can be labeled as, quote, evil, so that they themselves can destroy that evil because they look to vanquish it within themselves. And only do they discover it is no different than seeking revenge. You cannot change the world from without, but only from within. This would be his major character flaw. In the fight for justice, he will lose himself into what good truly is, thus rendering him susceptible to the whisper. The whisper to Aleister. It will be a personal fight for him to find justification in his action, for he has labeled right and wrong in his mind to such a degree that now he has put himself on a fixed path, a path that will, in his mind, keep him on the straight and narrow, but in reality, it will only close him into a rhetoric and even close-minded view of what is on his side and what is in the other. He boxed himself in a way of isolation and fear, for now he will always have an enemy, for it is anything that doesn't follow his creed of good. This will in turn make him turn away from everyone eventually, and cast him alone in the Blightlands of confusion. In this he has forsaken himself, and if he continues, then he will be cut off from what he truly desires, and in turn look to make the world as evil as he willed it in his mind. Essentially, he's stuck in a loop of you're making the world around you when you label things the way they are. Good and evil, good and evil. That's going to be your fault when it turns into good and evil. And all of a sudden, your good gets smaller, that evil gets bigger. Because your mind gets more and more warped from that viewpoint. That's just what happens, and that's what we're seeing today. A lot of warped minds. And I'm not saying that to be evil, as they say. Because honestly, I'm not on anyone's side. It's not who I am. I'm not here to choose those sides and be the person that, I don't know. What side are you on, good or bad? Left or right? Up or down? That bullshit. Who's better in your world? Who are your prophets of goodness? What do you, preach about? Who do you help? Who's your enemy? It's things that make people feel good about themselves. They can justify a bad guy. And if we share a bad guy, there's less fear there. No one truly speaks their own voice. They speak what makes them part of a bigger voice. Because we really, really want consciousness. Unity consciousness. And we're starting to see semblance of it right now, where people are, I keep saying it, but joining sides. I offend this person offends me. He is my enemy. And the enemy hears that and says, now I have a threat, and I shall fight this threat. Because he is taking away the very reason for my being here. This country, or whatever. This is what people do. We pretend like if you get rid of religion, that it'll all go away. But right now it has nothing to do with religion. And that's the problem right now. People face what is only within themselves. Nothing can save you. Science can't save you. Love can't save you. You have to understand what you're doing and what's going on around you. That's the only way you can fix it. Realize it not to be manipulated any longer. But of course people won't see it as that. They're only going to see it as doing what's right, depending on whatever view they have of what right is. That's another thing too. I don't even think evil is real. There's no way it can be. It's all viewpoints. It's all basically what you believe right is. It's self-serving most of the time. Helps justify your own actions or beliefs or whatever. To which that is not right. Anyway. Yeah, the concept behind the book is exploring a lot of these areas in the realm of fantasy, because it just seems to be a very easy outlet to walk through this. Because not only that, but you can make layer upon layer upon layer of themes and ideas and philosophies. Because at the end of the day, people don't tell stories for fun. They tell stories to help, or to teach, to guide, That's ego, yeah, whatever. But that whole bullshit they talk about now with ego death and all that, I don't believe a word of it. Ego is self. Just to walk away from self means what you can do through meditation, unity. Ego is individual. Ego is what you bring to the table. You just gotta make sure you don't leave it there. But, I mean, darkness is, in the book at least, it's just an exploration of, essentially, like, there's many different things, but one thing it can be is depression. And essentially when I say that in these characters they open themselves up to the darkness, and from within the darkness is when the whisper grows. That's basically saying when you bring that negativity, thus it will make you depressed and sad. And within that is where your anxiety grows, is when your defense mechanisms happen. It's when you act out and you do those things and you hurt people's feelings because you're trying to defend yourself and all that bullshit. That happens, fight or flight. I don't want to be here, so I'm going to be negative. I'm in a situation where I'm uncomfortable, so I have to do this. That's the whisper. The whisper is the promise. Because essentially what the whisper is an idea of your fight or flight, where it says, or your defense mechanism, where basically it says, like, I can protect you if you trust me. What do you want? And there's that part of ourselves where when we're extremely depressed, and there's that part of us that seeks out to understand what makes us feel such a way. Well, it's this person, let's say. Well, I'm angry at that person. And you make up all these scenarios in your head of why you're angry. What would you say? What would you do? And it takes hours. That is the whisper. That is the promise. Now you know. Now you know what to do in these times. How you justify that. I mean, that's only one thing that he is, but essentially the concept of the book is obviously, like everything, is life. A lot of it's mine, the people that made it. And, how we handled it and what we walked through. What hopelessness we had. What pain we carried. What hardships we went through. Some more than others. But some felt them more. Some people can go through some heavy times, come out of it okay. Kinda. Other people can have a little bit happen and completely lose themselves to it. That could happen too. I mean, I don't know. It's crazy how that stuff can affect you so much. I don't know. But the problem is when you're dealing with a book as such, and as many years has been spent on it, and as much depth as you go into, it does explore the idea of escapism. Because in the beginning of the book, it is set up in such a way that it helps you see what the potential of the book is, what the main story is, at least in the first book. That's kind of the purpose. Any book does that. This is happening. Might be the outcome. Okay, so you know what's going on. But then when you go into it, essentially for a while, it's just pure escapism. Blissful escapism. Going away from the reality and walking into somewhere that feels better than where you are right now. Gives you hope and happiness. And that's what I planned to do with Aval. With the first city that you walk into. As the reader. It opens up and there's just as always, this beautiful town. massive metropolis right along the sea. The warm weather, the bronze sun in the sky, shining over the sea as the ships coming and going from the Twi'leks Canal. Looking out from there, heading back into the port to where the massive market is constructed, where it is built into the earth, going and circling the circumference of the city, like in Toronto, where it's built underground, the massive mall network. And that's the Yavol marketplace, under the city. Almost dwarven looking. And that's where Eris is, and that's where his family has had shops. And you walk out from there into the square where the entrance is, the other side of the entrance. Well, one of them, I should say. And it's this big, beautiful, sprawling, multicultural place of white buildings with gold tops and red buildings with gray tops. All the colors are there. It's a bastion of hope. It's the jewel of the West. It's the place of paradise, and equality, and hope, and what could be. It's just everything that was good in that world is in Yavol. Beyond the Murphos, the dangerous sands that guard it from the evil of the country they escaped from, which is Tantorum. Protected by the mountains to the east of Gaiavala, and the wildlands to the north where no man has ever ventured, until now. It's isolated, it's at peace, it's comfortable, it's quiet. And then it falls under attack by darkness. But it's unclear as what happens. That isn't you put two and two together. And you realize that this character Eris is walking hand in hand with the one who will see his doom. And obviously there's a lot of themes in there, you know. You can find them if you want. You know, a bastion of hope. How futile it can be, and how easily it is to have a pace of paradise and equality. Just how easy it is for it to fall apart. Easy. Just because of what? Greed? Fear? Think of Judan. Jaheir? The mastermind behind it? I don't know. I would say maybe in his mind, the destruction of man. Because he's a Nakume and he thinks the rhetoric of the Fachu, you know, created by a gun Fachu, a separatist from the Keeper Order, of man needs only be destroyed because it is his fault the world is in the state it is in. Cypherus, he just wants his son back. At that point, I don't think he gives a shit what effect he has in the world. I mean, what you hear, he represents most of the Serpentine Order. So most of what you see is thrown away so quickly. And everything that's good in this world vanishes just for that while. Until the rest of the book, Eris is running, and running, and running. Then he goes through the Murphos, the labyrinth of sands, with a forgotten king, and created the pillars of hope. The barrier gets the darkness, that which makes the sands swirl and confuse. And now they start to fail, and the darkness comes from the ground again. And all that's evil is coming back. And all the characters that follow him start to notice this as well. Nahum, Anna, Titus. Eventually, Alistar. or sorry, Elastra, as it would be pronounced in the South, and as well as Vathia. But I mean, obviously, when I talked about those characters, they're gonna have their own problems as well, and they will be the viewpoint of when Eris's character, the middle, witnesses all this destruction and runs away. He is going to be replaced with the concepts of Elastra and Vathia as left and right. What is evil? Where does it come from? Why does it come? Why does it go? My God. I don't know. I don't know. Anyway, I don't know. So, getting back to Nadrana, I'm sorry, getting back to the book where this all takes place. It's really important, I guess, to picture what it is that's being talked about. So, at least for the foreseeable future of this book, it mostly takes place in Voss, which is one body of land in the area called Atria, which looks to be three bodies of, or they almost got continents that lie between two large continents. Those aren't really continents, though. They're like an islands. They're about the size of maybe two Englands. You know what I mean? Like, it's like that. And they lie between these two massive continents. And the three bodies are made up of Voss, Trovia, and Ansar. So, with the first story, and much of the second story, comes into focus Voss. And where I was talking about is in a country inside of Voss called Etrovia. Oh my God, I'm so fucked up. So, let me type something in. Sick. Because I gotta have something playing in my head. Okay. So, those where story takes place, like I said, is Voss, and inside of Voss is three nations. To the south, Tantorum. To the east, Lyria. And on the western side is Adrana. And Adrana is where Eval sits, and Eval is the capital city of Adrana. So basically, when there's wars going on, as there always are in every fantasy book. But between Voss, damn it, it's for between Adrana and Tantorum, 1607 was the year that Adrana gained its independence from Tantorum. Much like you see with the Americas to Britain. Let's imagine they shared a continent, her body of land. Now, the year of the book is 1647. So many years have passed since that. So the setup of the attack in Aval could easily be surmised to be Tantorum, some sort of covert attack, but even to anyone with a brain, that seems to be a bit bold. A bit of a bold move to do something on that scale. Essentially burn the city to the ground, watching its ruin. Now, Eris, the young man the story appears to focus around, is that viewpoint that was stated earlier. The neutrality, the isolationist, the one who watches the world from afar, essentially, thrust from his home of peace and justice and all that, put into the big world of chaos and turmoil, kind of like everyone faces once they step outside their house. And that's essentially what it is to be the view, or the focal point, I should say, of the story. It's just merely a spectator. I mean, that's the purpose of it. Eris's true purpose isn't to be, at least in book 1, the hero to save everyone. He's merely just the eyes for you to look through. Because I think a lot of the story, as it goes on, revolves a lot more around Cypher's choices through his story arc, and the decisions that he makes because of what has happened to him, and what he has let happen to him cause him to be where he's at now, to which he's on his knees begging for the salvation of his son. So when a man would do anything for his child, and that's where you see Cypher doing whatever it takes to free him. It's very important that it's understood that essentially that is the main character. Though told through the eyes of Eris, as in the spectator, or you, rather, are the one to watch the main character go through what he's going through. And there's a lot to be said about what happened to him and his backstory, which I can get into. So I think it would be best to start with Cypher and who he is, and set up where the book begins, essentially. So let me grab that, and we'll begin there. So his name is Cypher Ella-en-Shey. And obviously, the story begins essentially in his mind, to which it continues until the prologue is complete, and then you jump into the mind of Eris, who merely spectates upon Severus's actions. Born on Trinus 14th, 1595. Early childhood is unknown, up until the age of about 14, to which he joined the Etrovian military as a conscript. It was part of Etrovian culture at this time, nearing the end of the Heartland Expanse. In the year 1609 until 1615, he had risen to the ranks of Royal Engineer, where he constructed and aided in the constructions of bridges for Royal Falskers and the pontoon bridges, though his prowess was unmatched in battle when it came down to it, thus giving him the revere of Ella-en-Shey in the Battle of Yavain Ridge, to which he then adopted as his last name. After his completion of his military service by 1615, he had reunited with his lost love from his early days back in the Etrovian continent of Elengur. They had a child together named Balrend in 1616. Yet after 2 years, his wife would abandon them for unknown reasons, leaving Cypher to raise the boy on his own. In the year 1620, when Belran was the age of 4, he was working job to job in search for steady pay to support his child. It was a hard time making ends meet, causing him to do some questionable tasks for mob bosses in Etrovia during this time. But when a call came from the commander he once served in the military with the name of Dobrodens, he had written to him for a job opportunity. When Cypherus met with the now Etrovian noble, he spoke about a job in canal work over in Adrana. The construction had come to a halt after complications had arisen, and Dobrodens could think of no other than Cypherus to fix this problem. And what the part of the note read was, "There was no other than I could ever dream of that could make this wrong a right and get us back on track," he later wrote. It was then that Cypherus packed up and moved out to the continent of Atria, a young and growing place with ties of their own early age. Cypherus was provided income and any support to make it across the Epirian safely and find a new home at the behest of Dobrodens. Cypherus arrived in the capital of Adrana, in the city of Avalia, or as it was now called, Aval, to which he found a beautiful home in the upper heights at the choosing of Dobrodens. Then Cypherus placed his son in the care of nannies that were also provided. This all meant so much for him, and he was incredibly grateful for these gifts and giving him a second chance at the age of 25. It was 4 years they lived in Aval, and while Cypherus was helping complete the Twilus Canal, his son was given the best education in Avalian studies, indeed the best in all of Atria. After the christening of the Twi'leks Canal in 1624, Cypherus was completing in his work and lived quietly for a few months after that with his 8-year-old son. Only after a few months were his funds beginning to run dry. Aval was an expensive city. Though it was tough on his pride, he eventually wrote to Dobrodens and asked if he could help him find work that would require his skills. To which months later he had replied from the noble writing, "Though I do not see why one with such skill that you possess would find it difficult in work, I am sure that there can be something arranged for the Ella and Shay, that you are and always were my old friend." In 1 month after the arrival of this letter, will my letter arrive to the Adine head of house, my cousin. And when it does, I would like you to ask for an audience with his retainer. Tell his retainer that Judan's bastard cousin never forgets. He'll quite understand the urgency. And though Cypherus was clueless to how to accomplish this, he waited for 1 month. The House Adine. After Cypherus talked to the retainer Novela, he was then given an invitation to the House Adine. And when Cypherus arrived at the noble house of Adine that stood before the entire city of Aval, he was met with a royal welcome and was invited in. After a time, he was met by the famous Judan Adine himself in his study, to which the two had a long conversation, to which this is merely a part of it, or more like the end of it. I will be clear. I have no need for a royal engineer such as you are, but since Dobrodens vouches so heavily for you, then I must oblige that bastard of a man. After all, he did provide our house with the means to construct the Twilus Canal, so I suppose I owes it to him. And rather, that's something far grander to which his eyes always gazed upon. Now tell me, he said you served in the royal army in Etrovia, is this correct? Yes, sir, I served in my lord, as well as again on the construction of the canal. You see, it was my doing that brought it from a standstill. Oh, I see. You are that fellow who saved us all. Well, now I'm sure we could find something suited for you, though I'm sure you will think it strange, but I have a very particular task for you, one that I'm sure you would be easily acquainted. You see, it's my son Venik. An honorable lad, but foolhardily, I'm afraid. You see, with the talks of war on the horizon in the South Sea of Yipyoi, and that damned Torek vessel being sunk, I'm afraid he's quite keen on this. Though I'm sure you can understand why I feel this is not Adrana's war. If I'm to be frank with you, at any rate, I want you to train the boy. Train him, sir? Oh, come now, I've heard many great things about royal soldiers. I've even seen them in combat during the Freydin War. Though not because of your honorable attack, but your passive resolve. That right they teach you I've heard so much about. To which Cyphers almost instantly replied, not to engage, but to study one's opponent, to find his resolve and respect it, to back away from combat that does not threaten the homelander's way of life. Yes, that one. That will do. Come now, let me show you my home. It was at this meeting that Judan quickly respected Cyprus's resolve, and even invited him to stay upon his grounds. And for 4 years did his relationship with Judan and his son Vanek grow. In fact, Belran and Vanek became fast friends as well, cementing the strong bond between the two men. In the late months of 1628 was war declared by Tentorm against the free states of Lyria, sending all of Atria into conflict. That is, except for Adrana, who remained neutral to it all. But much of the other great houses called for joining of the conflict, but to Judan ad-Din, it would never happen. Calling into question his resolve, in which he confided with Cyprus about his plans of growing Adrana, and having her not be totally reliant on her neighboring islands. I should say, and her neighbors inland, and that would be Etrovia. But to look without and strengthen her stance on the world's stage, to which Cyprus agreed with the house leader. It was Cyprus who helped Judan put his vision to Adrana's people for the grand vision of growth and expansion, which he did in front of all the houses and even allowed citizens to attend it, for it was held in a massive coliseum. To make it understood, Cyprus was not on the main stage. He was not a political player. He wasn't someone that citizens would come to see as a powerful figure. He was merely just eventually befriended with Judan, who Judan is like Pompey. Not like a Caesar. This was not a dictatorship. This was, the way that Adrana worked, I can go into detail, actually, of what Adrana is and the political systems, which I will do after this, just to clarify it, but it was a democratic view, and the major houses were the ones that controlled the happenings in Adrana. And the major houses were, for the most part, landholders. So it's somewhat of a democratic, sort of feudalistic way of governance. Okay, I'll get into that, obviously, because I think it's important to understand how that all works, to where Cyprus was involved in the situation. Cyprus had been going to the Chantry after a few months after his arrival to the new lands, if not only out of pure interest. He was curious as to how those in Adrana chose to see the big picture. And when it finally came to Judan, he was overjoyed. And after giving a hug, he said to Cyprus, "If you want to see what's really happening, come with me." Now that's another thing too, the Chantry, and I could definitely go into that too. I have all this stuff all written down. This is all thought out, planned. So I can go into the Chantry as well. I don't know if I should do it right now. Let's get lost. We'll come back to it, I guess. We'll figure it out. This was the point where Cyprus learned about the secret society that discussed, quote, the truth, and how it used to control the populace. It was very strange indeed, but he did take to the new higher learning, and how it affected the unknowing people of Adrana. It was all fascinating, and what the real threat was to the lands. As for if he truly believed it all, the Forgotten King, the Whisper, Anaku myths, it was hard to take, but his Etrovian upbringing always kept him a skeptic, to which he and Judan would argue for hours at a time. It was in the early months of 1630, when Adrana had claimed significant land to the wild north and expanded her trade and income greatly. Adrana was becoming a very powerful nation indeed. During this time, Judan mentioned to Cyprus that he planned to visit the new claimed lands of the north. At first, Cyprus thought nothing of it, but when he discovered Judan's real reason for it, the visit, he then questioned him. Obelisks? In the north? Those aren't the ones from the old stories, are they? No. It's true, you know. It's an Anaku legend, and I want to see it for myself, said Judan. My lord, man hasn't set foot so deep into the north before. There's no telling what is out there. Yes, it's true, but... And what word we do get is astounding. Great large roaming beasts lumbering like that of the Titans. The giant clans. Yes, I know it could be dangerous, but I'm taking the best of my guard. Oh, and you as well. Me, my lord? Yes, why don't you take your son as well? I'm sure it'll be fine. We shall have the best protection, and even the new frontier warriors are prowling about, I'm sure. After some convincing, Cyprus eventually agreed, though this decision would lead to his life changing forever. Dreer, 22nd, 1630. It was a cool morning when Cyprus and Balron exited their tent to look out over the untamed lands of the wilds, or Al-Badan. It was the next step in Adranian history. The new conquered lands in Judan, Cyprus, and Belran would be going on an expedition to find the rumored obelisks hiding in the tangled and massive forest. And it was reported by scouts along the way, the new lands that had previously been untamed, because of fear that the natives would rise against to destroy Adrana. This was the first time any Adranian force walked onto the land and stalked properly the future settlements. Settlements that were beginning to quite quickly. Judan made sure to visit all the barracks, villages, and walk among the people, though all along the way he would tell Cyprus of what he truly desired, the obelisks. It was said that they were portals, or quite possible devices that would allow them to communicate with those in the other realms, to which Judan was able to bring a soul singer along with them. I could tell you what a soul singer is later. Actually, you know what? I meant to tell you what a soul singer is now. The lowest branch of the chantry, and quite possibly one of the most important, was the soul singers. The soul singers follow the school of spiritmancy, the ones who commune with those that have either passed into the next realm, or those who always inhabit that realm. This is a tricky job to be done, as the one who always inhabits that realm can at times create chaos for we in the living of this realm. They have been given the name daemons by some, and the daemons are the guardians of this next realm that is often confused with death or the land of the dead. And a quote is, "The soul singers could hear the moving of the realms." And that's the soul singer. I can get into the Adrog's chantry. Obviously, that's a part of the chantry. It's a belief system that they have in Adrana. Now, each obelisk was known to have its own power. There were a few in Adrana, in the Adranian forest, that was safeguarded by the Donzurians. Even the barrier in the Murphos was because of obelisks. They were said to be created by the Forgotten King against the threat of darkness. As to what the obelisks were in the north, it was unknown. But Judan would not let this mystery go unchecked, though Cyprus had its reservations as to what they were walking into. Not only with the portals, but treading the land that was harsh to man. He had heard rumors in his time in Aval about how man should never set foot in the tainted land to which it goes named Al-Abadan, which meant in Adranian, lands of the wild. It was believed that the wild were the race of giants that roamed the lands who held no regard towards men. There's something about the lands to the north, the wild north, Vidrana, where even the world seems to loom larger, and you seem to be smaller as the world envelops around you. Looking out in the horizon and watching it wrap around higher in the sky, in a way where it makes you feel like living in a tunnel. But it's the outside world. It's massive and large. Because that's what that's what the world is, essentially, when it comes to the world called Yuandra. It's a living place, breathing, and of its own ambition. Cyprus was fearful for his son and what dangers were posed to them. Was he going to be able to protect him? Even if they had a battery of Mullican, which were royal guard. After a few weeks, they were soon in the Tyclorhue forest, thanks to the native guide, a half-breed from the giants. As they made camp on the outskirts for the night, strange encounters then began. Balran was behaving quite strangely once they camped upon the hill, overlooking Tyclorhue forest. Cyprus began to notice more and more his erratic behavior. He would talk about a song that he could not leave from his head, a voice that pulled him into the forest. Cyprus even caught him trying to, in the night, walk alone in the forest while the campfires were roaring and the guards were telling stories of encounters of the wilds. It wasn't until the next day that they ventured in while Cyprus kept a close eye on his son. Many long hours went by until they happened upon a massive open field that was littered with shining great rocks that protruded from the ground in all manners of either decay or dilapitation. There were only but a few that stood unopposed by nature's force. In Judan's excitement, he headed straight for them. After walking the fields of stone, he was in awe and wonder, while Cyprus looked on as his friends sauntered with a grin upon his face. It wasn't until he looked at Balran, who at this point was alone, standing in front of one of the largest stones, that Cyprus called out to him. In the blink of an eye, he vanished in thin air. His son did. A gasp came over the party when Cyprus ran to find him with Judan in tow. They searched high and low, calling his name. Then suddenly a cloud of storm was circling overhead. Its green and blue color gave a chilling effect, as it was clear this was not from nature. That's when they heard it. A low bellow of a voice, followed by the sound of a horn in the distance. After the horn, a howl of wolves could be heard. And just like that, they were surrounded by a pack of black wolves. Judan was heard to have said, "The wolves of Tan." They did not attack at first, only merely circling, and seemed to be communing with each other. Cyprus, in a panic, yelled out for his son. And that's kind of where it ends. But in short, his son was trapped in the other realm, but his body was found lifeless, yet still breathing. And when he took him to Ela, by the behest of Judan, they found that he was taken by the king, the Forgotten King. It was the Fachu who promised that his son could return, if and only if he would bring them back a sacrifice. Then they could enter the realm and retrieve his son. That is Cyprus's mission. I just gotta bring back a sacrifice, I can get my son back. No big deal. But it just so happens he got himself caught up in something a little bit bigger than himself. And let me find that one. Serpentine Order. Within the Keeper Order, there are those who are indoctrinated by the tenets, and those who are in the shadow have found the truth of what the Order once was. For in a time, the once purity of right became dogmatic and corrupt. Let me see if I can find that part. Let me find that part. So to understand what all that is, probably needs to be explained what exactly the Fachu are. Let me find that. In Symphony Citadel is where the process of the Master and the Lamb happened, or simply the use of the descendants to access the other realm and the creation of the Serpentine Order. In Symphony Citadel, the descendants are trained in the arts of siphoning power that was and is the Forgotten King, being that the Forgotten King is in the realm of creation. There are all manner of powers that are at one's disposal, for anything in that realm is of no consequence. What is taught the most is the power of astral. This is the power, magic, that pulls from the Forgotten King's very being. After that mastery, it is more like what could be done with the tools of the Creator. This is a school to teach in the realm of the Forgotten King, but one would think this would be dangerous for the Fachu. They have a very simple way to negate the truth, understanding of the participants' quote, education, or propaganda rather. They teach the students the way of understanding as they would quote it. This meant instead of action, it was reaction. To the Fachu, it was seen as weakness, though within the Keepers they saw the same world that must become whole, not by force of the hand of man. The Fachu looked for the last descendants, not only to allow their game, but to take away the last path back to the Forgotten King, and destroy him. It was seen as perhaps cutting the Forgotten King's path back, and to allow the Whisper to finally destroy him in the realm of creation. Instead of fighting the world of man, this was a new idea that hadn't been proven yet. For if the Whisper could be tracked back to the realm of creation, then perhaps he could be destroyed in that realm by the Serpentine Order, as the Whisper would take shape of a being physical and could be vanquished. This was a new theory. Now that might be confusing. It's like, what are you talking about? Well, the Serpentine Order looked to destroy man and the ways of man, because it was man, or the Forgotten King, who put a curse in the world of Yuandra to begin with. And it was the curse that had the Anakume almost fall to ruin because of this very king and his wicked ways, to which this goes back all the way to the beginning, a story of the Titans, and the founding and creation of the Anakume people. It's the only way we could ever understand what's going on, is to go back to the beginning and see what the Anakume were, so then we can understand who then the Keepers were, and the ancient kings, and obviously the Forgotten King, and the war to which led to his somewhat banishment in the realm of creation, throwing everything out of balance, to which The world of the living could never join the circle of the realms that lie outside. And what saw the construction or reasoning for the astral, for that is the crossroads into the barrier. I mean, the idea of that is the idea of consciousness, and how beyond our understanding, is a whole nother set of realms that could slowly be influencing us, to which I can go further into. There's a lot of things to go into. A hell of a lot. I think that's the point where it's like, you need to ask questions to see, the answers that I can give. That's a good idea. To which this one's going to end, right about here. We'll pick up from there, wherever the answers lead it.